Welcome to the Resilience Series. I'm Stephanie Weaver, author of the brand new, now out, My Great Relief Plan Cookbook, which has a theme of resilience. My guest today is Daniella Mestyanek Young. Daniella is a cult survivor, Army veteran, and received the Presidential Volunteer Service Award from President Obama. Her book, Uncultured, a memoir of cults, war, and belonging, will be out this fall and just received a star review from Publishers Weekly. Welcome, Daniella.
Hey, Stephanie, thanks for having me.
Absolutely. So, you come from a family with a complicated history. Can you tell us in broad strokes about your upbringing?
Yeah, so my family is, my grandfather joined this cult when he was a young teenager or a young person, had just finished college, and immediately became the prophet's CPA. He brought in his girlfriend, whose mother was so happy to have her, teenage boomer daughter go off and join this group of Jesus people instead of hippies, and gave them property. So my family has been, very tied into these leadership circles from the beginning of the Children of God. And my mother was, born and raised one of the first children. And then when she was 14, first of all, when she's 13, she gets married to the prophet, kind of symbolically, but kind of not. And then when she's 14, she gets pregnant with me from the other finance guy, who's the my father is older than my grandfather. They were colleagues. And so then I came into it, and I always say my upbringing was kind of no spontaneous moments of joy. So it's kind of like we lived in these institutions. I had a mother, but I only saw her for an hour a day. And by the time I was coming up in the 80s and 90s, the Children of God had tried to sort of leave the sex cult behind, rebrand as this, just Jesus, love, faith, revolution. And they would make all of these videos, like childhood instructional videos, kind of the beginning of that movement, right? Religious and non-religious. And it was all this sort of attempt to whitewash the background. And so I kind of grew up doing that. So I guess I would say it was almost like I was Lindsay Lohan, but then I lived in a very religious institution when I wasn't sort of filming or outperforming.
Yes. And so it's a pretty notorious cult because of the sex. Do you want to talk just briefly about that? You don't have to if you don't want to.
No, I always do, because it's a way to show, I say nobody ever joins a cult, right? Nobody ever has. First rule of cults is you're never in a cult. And the Children of God was love, faith, and Jesus. And then, it's interesting because I've been in the entrepreneur world, which is a little bit culty, and you're always looking for your unique value proposition. And I say that David Berg found his unique value proposition amongst many, many, many sort of cults and startup religions that were going on in the 60s. And he decided his thing was going to be sex, right? So it was your basic extreme evangelical Christianity, but then he took sex and he flipped it, right? So instead of sex being from the devil, sex was from God, and took this verse from St. Paul, everything done in love is pure. Unto the pure, all things are pure. All these different quotes, mix them together, and comes up with his ideology that essentially turns into religious prostitution. So using the grown women to go out and lure literally men and money to support their group. And then, pedophilia for God, as I say, which, was, well, if God loves everyone and God loves children, then I guess this is how we show God's love. And even, as much as they like to say it ended, uh, as we find so often, telling the pedophiles to stop raping the children does not actually work, as you will see in my book, and I think Jeffrey Epstein's guest list. When you put these people in power that are seriously messed up, and the values of your organization have been this thing, and you try to sort of rebrand or cover it up or fix it later, it doesn't actually work out. And
Yeah.
so, we see in my childhood growing up, we see things very similar to, for example, what you'll see in the Mormon church, right? Where they still believe in polygamy as one of their highest ideals, but they just don't practice it because of the outside world. And I actually think that's one of these really good signals for toxic group behavior or abusive behavior of any kind, is anytime someone's telling you, you know, we do this, we believe in this, but we don't talk about it with outside people. It's kind of always a power and control signal, right?
Yeah,
It's
it's a
about to go
red
wrong
flag.
if it hasn't yet.
Yeah. So, one of the things that struck me about your childhood was the sort of cognitive dissonance around normalcy. In one sense, it was normal for these activities to be taking place because they took place throughout your community and everyone was doing it and everyone was involved. And yet, on some level, you and the other children knew it wasn't okay. What was a turning point for you when you started saying no more or this isn't okay?
Yeah. So, I always say I was born an atheist into a Christian extremist group. And I just always kind of, I remember being very young and being like, yeah, this God guy. And, you'll read in Uncultured where I sort of definitely lose my faith if I ever had it. And I'm like, I remember being told by the aunties, if you're not in the children of God, you go to hell, and being like, well, hell's going to suck. But definitely for me, my moment, my big moment, what I call the crack in the brainwashing, which like for a lot of Americans was on January 6th, for example. So my big moment was 9/11, and we had recently come to the US for the first time in my life. And we're living in this country we've been told our whole lives is evil, is called Babylon the Whore. And even though we're technically from there, we hate it. And we're in America, and 9/11 is happening. And it's the first time I've even seen live news on television ever. And, I'm watching these people jumping to their deaths. I'm 14. I'm still trying to even comprehend that this is actually happening in live action. And I'm hearing around me, what we always do, right? Praying and praising God and talking about how this is his righteous judgment on America. And I'm like sitting there. I feel like I remember it as sort of watching the cognitive dissonance, right? And then I heard the term religious extremism, and I was like, maybe, they're talking about the terrorists who are bombing the towers. And I'm like, well, maybe we are also a bit of the religious extremists, and it took me another 2 years from that point to actually get myself out of there. But that was kind of the point that I was like, I'm even done with this charade. Like, I'm not even playing this charade anymore. I'm just here until I can physically get away from you people.
Yeah, and so, you from the outside to an outsider reading your book, which I recommend to everyone, um, or looking at any cult, it seems so extreme that you can't imagine how like regular people would be part of it, and yet it doesn't feel that way when you're in it, right? So, how do you think people get sucked in, and what are they looking for?
Yeah, this is one of the things I really tried to do in Uncultured is like bring you into that world, because I feel like so often when we are shown glimpses into cults or armies or anything for that matter, it's like from this outside perspective of, oh, I would never do that, right? That would never be me. And I think so there's a reason I start off the book by saying the first rule of cults is you're never in a cult, right? And nobody joins a cult, right? Everyone joins, clubs or workout groups or churches or young, clean cut teenagers on the beach witnessing to hippies about Jesus, right? In Southern California in 1969, which was the children of God. And then, cults, another favorite saying of mine is cults do some things right? They give people motivation, they give people community, and everybody loves to be surrounded by people that think exactly like them and reinforce not only their ideas, but like this passion, right? And so then you start building what this cult scholar, Dr. Daniella Mestyanek calls four-way bounded control, which is, a transcendental mission, right? Like we're going to save the world for God, or we're going to die for the American flag. And then you get, structures for influence, structures for control, and you have your charismatic leader. And as soon as you get all four of those things into place, right, doesn't automatically even mean it is going to be toxic. But it does mean that like when your group logic starts to break down and your group norms start to take over, you can't see it, right? You're already so tied up in this now unbounded control. And this can happen, we study this in cults, but this can happen in kind of any kind of group.
Right. I feel like your book is even more important now in the last week and a half. So we're recording this on July 7th. There were several mass shootings very recently, which are framed around a toxic ideology. And even yesterday there was a Republican lawmaker who maybe misspoke, but somehow seemed to suggest she would rather shoot her grandchildren than have the Second Amendment repealed. I mean, you get to the point where, as an outsider, you're saying, okay, well, that's lunacy. And then the next time it's more, and then you're like, well, what could possibly break through? So is there a way to reach people who are in a cultish belief system if they don't think they need saving?
So yes and no. I keep being told that Uncultured is such a timely book. And I'm like, well, yes, because we are living through the culting of America. And some of us have seen this before. The bad news is that it is not easy. One of the things cults rely on a lot is isolation, right? So in my grandfather's time, this was, you literally take your followers and you isolate them on a compound in Texas or in Brazil, where I grew up. But now it's, you take all of your people that are cult members are just seekers, right? The only trait researchers have found, people that are searching for something, right? And the internet has brought this whole new dimension to isolation, right? And in fact, Heaven's Gate, the 39 members that suicided in California, that was the world's first internet cult, right? And so the internet has now become its new form of isolation, or Fox News, right, has become its own form of isolation where truth is questioned and you can become isolated in this thought idea, right? So then there's kind of two ways to deprogram people from cults. And one is, we had Children of God had a guy, Ted Patrick, who was literally breaking into the cult and physically taking people away and keeping them away from their belief system for long enough to deprogram that. Of course, that is not recommended and is kidnapping. But, and then this is where I come to like the spy intelligence work, right? So in order to get to be a good spy, you need to have placement and access, right? So you need to be able to still influence your family members. The bad news, or what I think a lot of people aren't understanding, we mentioned January 6th was kind of a big wake up moment for a lot of people. And this happens, the parallel to cults here is when the predicted apocalypse fails to occur, right? And research shows that about 10% of people wake up and go home, and the other 90% of people double down harder because of this cognitive dissonance we've talked about, right? And because you're so bought in and it's your whole life, you want the world to end, right? Again, there are some people in our government that want the world to end, right? They want the big David Koresh sort of ending. And so this becomes more challenging, right? And one of the books that I think is a great read for anyone who has sort of family members in these idea cults right now is called Walking Away from Hate, The Awakenings of a White Nationalist by Eli Saslow. And it's about Derek Knight, who's the son of Don Knight, who runs, the world's largest sort of white supremacy network. And you go through the 4 or 5 year long process of his college friends and eventual wife and girlfriend and wife, breaking him of his ideology. And it is a long haul and it is very difficult. And even once you sort of leave a cult and disavow your ideology, you still spend about another decade or longer figuring out what drew you to that, what the impacts were on your psyche, and all of these different things, right? So I think really important thing is to keep lines of communication open, which does not mean you have to listen to all of their toxic garbage. It just means if you want those people back, you should keep lines of communication open. But also sometimes the realization that my grandfather is still in the cult, right? Not all in nonfiction, not all character arcs get redeemed, and some people don't come back from the cult.
Yeah.
And that is the honest truth.
Yeah. Thank you. That was helpful and sobering as well. So once you got out, you ended up joining the army, which you now liken to a different kind of cult. And it was a very intense experience for you doing 2 tours in Afghanistan, being one of the first females in combat situations there. Why do you think the army appealed to you after having come out of such a high control childhood?
Oh, I mean, I even knew it then. I know it a lot more now, but even then I was looking for a group. Um, and I said I would get back to this, right? So we saw cults get popular in the 60s and 70s in America, in the 80s in Asia, and in the 90s in Latin America. My family just followed that whole trend. And why this happens is because in times of social turmoil, in times of confusion, when social systems are being pulled down and new ones are coming up, cults are very appealing, which is also what we're seeing in 2020, right? And this is because humans really like clear-cut answers. And so here's a path, you take it. And I had, been dropped into the real world at 15 and spent 6 years struggling, really struggling. And then in college, I went all valedictorian, super student. And I remember literally looking forward to basic training because I won't have to use my brain for 3 months. They're just going to tell me, the Army has this phrase that all you have to do to be successful is be in the right place at the right time in the right uniform, right? So I won't have to think of anything. They'll tell me where to go. They'll give me a team, right? Here I have struggled to make friends for 6 years on the outside. And now I'm going to be in this brotherhood again, right? It's easy, it's appealing. And then of course there was the sort of, what else am I going to do, right? They're going to train me. They're going to give me a life after this. So yes, it was all, I realize it of course now more, but it was definitely this longing and this desire to be in a group. And for me, always very important, have a mission that I believe in, which is still one of my good and bad things about myself today.
Right. So, and the 101st is the Band of Brothers unit, right? So there's such a long history of that being sort of a group that has this almost lore about it for sure. Um, what did your experience in Afghanistan teach you about resilience? Because you were out with teams on the ground, one of the first females to do that, connecting with other women, in Afghanistan. So what did you see there that taught you about resilience, do you think?
Um, I mean, first of all, let's just say if you're going to be a woman in the 101st, you're going to learn a lot about resilience, or you're just going to quit because especially when you get deployed, you're 5% of the population as a woman on these army bases. And it's quite the interesting experience. One of the things I even wanted to say to you, Stephanie, was oh, I'm so glad you have an entire resilience series because it really does take a lot to explore that word. And I think, what I learned about resilience by being in the 101st is that, right? Resilience is complicated. And I thought and I worked very, very hard for 10 years to undo my whole past, right? I can run far enough away, I can cover it up, I can get enough success that one day I'll be fixed and I'll be fine, right? And so here I am for 10 years, wanting to die every single day, but outwardly just looking very, very successful, right? And finally, I am a captain in the Army and I'm still not better, right? What's wrong with me? And I really think, that was one of the things that I learned and was I almost feel like I got lucky to go to war twice so young and have all of my prior PTSDs and traumas triggered so badly because many of my peers, it takes them till their 30s or 40s to get started on this resilience journey. And I got to start when I was 24 by almost breaking. And, sort of move ahead, mental health, I can never say enough, was a big, big thing. I got very, very lucky that the year I joined the Army, or maybe the year after, there was a clause put into intelligence work, let's just say, that if mental health treatment was connected to sexual violence, then you didn't have to report it to your clearance. And so, anything I was seeing a mental health therapist about could be couched in that. So I was able to access, mental health on both of my deployments, which literally saved my life. So yeah, I guess my biggest thing about resilience is it's not done, it's not over. What doesn't kill you comes back and sometimes tries to kill you again, and reminds you of this thing constantly. And so it's just kind of a consistent amount of work, right? Living with the damage of the thing you have to be resilient for.
Thank you. So this is always my last question, and I love the question because I get different answers from everyone. So what are some self-care resilient strategies that you personally have found most helpful? You mentioned mental health care, but are there others?
Yes. So my first, actually biggest one is you have to tell people about your traumas, right? The things that broke you. And you don't have to write a book about it and tell everyone, but you need to have some people in your life from whom you're like your whole full self. And for me, like that was really the difference between, before, when I would have my triggers and my bad days, I would want to die. And now when I have my triggers and my bad days, I just like ugly cry with my husband and best friend and support system, right? So that support system, another thing for me has been understanding your body. My body, I did not listen to it for a really, really long time. And then I got really good at just shutting me down when I don't listen. So now I have, a lot of recurring health issues to deal with on top of trauma. And so, as you know, of course, with cookbook, listen to your body is huge, huge, huge for me. And then, there are all these little strategies, like create your home as, of course, a place of refuge, right? I put a lot of greenery in my house. I put a lot of things that remind me of Brazil, so that I feel like even if everything is terrible, I have this place that's safe. But yeah, my biggest self-care tip is, these people in your life that love you are not going to be pushed away by seeing you for who you are, right? They love you. And I sometimes flip this question around for people, and it's like, have you ever heard anybody's really hard stories and thought less of them, right? No, right? We always think more and wow. And when we share our stories, here I am thinking, I am so unique that I must die one day because I'll never find anyone that can understand me, to like, now I've written this book that everyone that reads it finds places to connect to. And I learned this by sharing my story, right? By actually not thinking that I was so special that nobody could understand it. So yeah, it's my biggest resilience tip is talk to people. Don't try to hide what happened to you, because you can never imagine what ways other people have been through like very similar emotions. And then they're going to be able to help you process that in return.
That's a great answer. Daniella, thank you again for being here today and sharing your work. Please visit uncultureyourself.com to learn more about her speaking and writing. You can pre-order Uncultured wherever you'd like to buy books, and we do encourage you to use independent bookstores when you can. It supports an incredible resource in your community. It also pays the author more, by the way. And if you can't afford to do that, then the next best thing is to ask your library to carry it, because libraries purchase books and that helps authors as well. Check out other episodes of the Resilience series on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Follow me at sweavermph to learn more about my brand new migraine relief plan cookbook. Thanks so much for watching.